Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Puckcord. Almost every single desi person will relate to the horrifying Rishta process. I've been there myself. Getting asked by your parents and aunties about your plans to get married, even when you're still in school, or perhaps you just started your first job. This is especially troublesome for desi girls, as they often start getting proposals from a very young age, and they're not even ready for it. Today, we bring on 25-year-old Zohra from California, USA, to talk about her encounters with various aunties, starting from when she was 15 years old all the way to now, and she's still not married yet. Zohra was born and raised in the US, but has family in Pakistan and is really aware of the culture. Along with her experiences, she also shares her opinions on marriage and why she prefers to wait. So without further ado, we'll take it to Zohra. When was the first time you would say you started getting approached by aunties and I guess other people for potential rishtas?
The youngest I can remember was probably when I was around 15, 16 years old.
So 15, 16. Yeah, that's pretty young. What are some of the, I guess, most memorable incidents from back then?
Well, my first experience was probably the most shocking because it was really random. I was with my mom at the doctor's office, and I was just standing in the hall reading some of the posters on the wall. And I could see this auntie, she was staring at me, and she approached my mom, and right in front of me, she asked my mom how old I was, because she was looking for a rishta for her nephew or something like that. And my mom, for some reason, lied about my age. She said I was 14, as if 16 wasn't young enough.
Oh, okay, so you were 15 and she just said 14.
Yes.
Like it would make a difference.
That would make a difference. But yes, so the auntie was like, oh no, that's too young. And then she just walked away. And then I remember we going home afterwards, and she told our entire family about it. We were all sitting in the living room. It was like a whole discussion. And, at that age, it's kind of embarrassing.
Yeah, at 15. So that was the first time you learned about how, I guess, the Rishta process works in desi families.
Yeah, it was very awkward.
So it's pretty similar here too, in the US, compared to like Pakistan, I guess. They still kind of network by sending their moms to go check girls out or something.
Yeah, I think, Pakistanis being outside of Pakistan is still a fairly new concept. So we haven't yet, let go of some of our cultural aspects, especially in the Rishta business, where parents assume that once you hit a certain age and you haven't been married, it's just because nobody wants you and you need some assistance. You need somebody to help you out.
Right. So then besides that, so that was the first time. Then what happened? Were there more similar types of incidents?
Yes, this was actually, I think a couple years later. I was probably around 17. There was this auntie that my mom was friends with, and she had a son who was like 26. So it was almost, 10 years difference.
Oh, okay. So you were 16?
Yeah, 16, 17 years old, I think.
All right. So he was like 26, okay.
Yes. And I think he had just graduated. And she wanted me to, get married to him. She would talk to my mom, and my mom's like, no, she's too young. And, my whole family knew about it. My sister-in-law used to, joke about it with me.
No, but wasn't the mom aware at least of the legal issues potentially with that? Or was her son not like kind of stopping her?
Well, I'm not exactly sure if her son was aware.
Oh, okay.
Because she was like a mutual friend amongst other friends. So if there was ever any dawat at someone else's house, she would be there.
Okay, so this was an auntie that you kind of regularly saw?
Yes.
Got it.
Yes. And she was very traditional, kind of very simple auntie. So I don't think she was really aware of any kind of legal consequences or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm surprised because you would think that she would at least go home and maybe mention it to her son. Like at least he would be the second point of sanity. This is the second check before she would go and do something like that.
Yeah, well, she wasn't very pushy about it or anything, but it was just something that we all knew. And then I would, everyone used to joke about it. I think eventually he found someone himself.
Okay.
Probably, I think he found someone through Shadi.com. I'm not sure.
Hmm.
But we were invited to their wedding. I think I was the happiest person at his wedding.
That's funny.
I was like so happy that this guy is getting married.
Yeah, right. So she can finally be off your back.
Yeah, so I took extra pictures of myself that day. I was extra excited.
Okay. You said you were 24 or 25?
25.
25, yeah. And you're not married yet, right?
Yes.
After 18, how many times would you say you have been kind of approached?
I would say quite a lot, especially in my 20s. There have been several aunties who come over and they will ask my mom, have you thought about your daughter yet? And I just want my mom to tell them no. Like, I don't think about my kids.
Yeah, what does your mom say? Does your mom try to tell you to consider some of these rishtas?
She does tell me to consider. She says that, a 25 is, the prime age and that I'm getting too old, as old desi moms do.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, so there have been several aunties who will come over and ask if I want to get married, what are my future plans about rishtas or whatever, or should they recommend someone?
Yeah, I mean, we have that in our house too, where I don't know what the cutoff point is, but I think it's like 22 or something. It's really low. After that age, it's like, oh, buddi kodi ho gayi.
Yeah.
Kudi, and basically you can't have kids after 22. They have this weird perception that after that cutoff point, after that age, it's all downhill from there. So you got to get married ASAP, otherwise you're kind of a burden on your family. That seems to be the root thinking. I don't know if that's really the thinking anymore, but that seems to be where it stems from. That after a certain age, the daughter is kind of a liability.
Yeah, it's in little things. Parents don't want to admit to it. They don't think that daughters are burdens. Like if I ask my mom, she won't think I'm a burden or anything. She says that I don't think like that. That's not my opinion. That's not what I mean. But it's in the way they say things. Like, there's this very famous phrase that you even hear often in desi television is like, apne kaun ja.
Yeah, so meaning it's not your house.
Yeah, like it's like I live here, this is my home. For some reason, I'm supposed to assume this non-existing place that will arrive sometime in the future is going to be, is my home now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's almost, basically making you feel like you don't belong here in your own home.
Right. I guess that would also interfere with just the fact that women are studying more now than they used to be able to in the past, right? Even up till like 20, 30 years ago in Pakistani culture, the girls weren't encouraged to study as much. So basically after they would pass high school or just do a few years of college or university, they'd just be married off because the idea was they're not going to have careers of their own anyway. So they need a man to kind of support them. But now you see like women, I see a lot of Pakistani girls too, going past above and beyond graduating college, then even studying beyond that oftentimes, or getting a job and a career. And that takes kind of years to build up. And, oftentimes their preference is they want to do all that before they get married so that they can feel independent at least. And they don't feel like, they're counting on their husband to support them. So is that something you think that parents are having a hard time grasping?
Yes, especially because for, young Pakistanis living out in the West, they're usually first generation. So their parents have grown up and, have been raised with different expectations from, back home.
Yeah.
I think it's hard for parents to understand that as a woman, you might want to be independent or that you might want to be in charge of your own pursuits and desires. This is something you hear pretty often from your parents where they say, oh, once you get married, you can do whatever you want. If you want to travel, you can do that after you get married. If you want to study more, you can do that after you get married. Which I say, well, your parents said the same things to you. And if you look at, a lot of older generation couples, they're not usually compatible with each other. And a lot of them complain about how they weren't able to do so many things after they got married.
You mean, yeah, you're talking about like arranged couples, right? Like older couples who were arranged themselves, probably.
Couples.
Right.
So I think now, a lot of, younger generation of Pakistani girls, they see this and they would want to achieve things on their own so that they don't have to rely on an outsider to accomplish their dreams for them. It's just not feasible to assume that someone else will be able to provide everything for you.
Yeah, and also I find a lot of when I was working, when I first started working, I think I met through my career, I met a lot of older Pakistani guys, and these guys, oftentimes I've met a lot of them that were 35 up to 40 years old and still not married yet, and I'm talking here in the States. So it's not just in Pakistan. In Pakistan, there will be a lot of guys who would be married involuntarily, like they want to, but they just can't find somebody because they don't have a job or something like that. But over here, they even have careers and everything, but they're just not married yet. I found that for a lot of them, their parents are kind of looking, they're concerned, but they're not nearly as concerned as, say, a girl who would go past 30 years old. That's kind of like a death sentence to the parents, I think.
Yeah. So, I have older brothers, but I don't think they were nearly as pressured as my mom pressured me. Basically, when I was in my early 20s, we would have this conversation maybe every 6 months, but now it happens like every other day, if not every day. I mean, just the other day, my mom sat me down and she was trying to have this serious conversation with me. She's like, you're 25. This is the time. It's going to take a while to find someone, and then you're probably going to want to get to know them. And then, next thing you know, you're like really old. And I'm like, my mom is in super panic mode. She legit thinks that I'm like at this point where I'm undesirable.
Well, it's also hard to break, I think, from the parents' perspective, and maybe even from your perspective, it's hard to break the tradition when you see other people around your age getting married and even having kids, right? So, like, your parents probably see their peers and kids of their friends, kids of their relatives and things like that, and they're all getting married around that time, or maybe even younger. So there are a few people who fight back against the tradition and the unwritten rules about getting married at the right time. But it gets really hard, I'm sure, due to the pressure. You're the odd one out because you aren't following the pattern that other people are.
Yeah. Well, I think my mom feels more pressure than me. She says, people always ask me, when is she getting married? Have you found her stuff for her yet? Right. It's almost like old outsiders are more concerned about someone else's child, what's going to happen to them, instead of focusing on themselves. I mean, in desi culture, women just age in doll years, I feel like.
Yeah, right.
25 is equivalent to like 50.
Right.
I mean, my mom was giving an example about how, a couple her neighbors got married, and one of their brides was older than the other one. So one of her neighbor's bride was like 30. The other one, his wife was 23, I think, at the time. And she was saying you could see the difference. The younger bride just looked way prettier and fresher, just more youthful. And not that the older one wasn't pretty, it's just that she didn't have the same, charisma of a bride.
Okay. One had an older bride and the other had a younger bride.
Yes. She was comparing their wives on their wedding day.
Right.
The older one, she's not that she didn't look pretty, it's just that she didn't look, as good as the younger one. She wasn't as fresh and youthful.
Yeah, but that's what I find odd. Is that really what it comes down to? Does it come down to like how you look in your wedding photos, and that kind of determines how happy your marriage will be? So you better get married at 21 because that's when your pictures will come out best. Otherwise, people will mock you for the rest of your life. It doesn't add up. It's a decision that will decide your happiness for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Depending on it, especially in desi culture, you're told to kind of, stick it out, even past the rough times. It's not like we're more versatile than Westerners. We are supposed to be, at least, that we're supposed to kind of put up with each other and live together forever. So then why rush the process just for good wedding photos and, you know, people's expectations?
Yeah, I mean, Desi culture is very superficial. They're very much into look, and if you're not young, then you're ugly. So it's just, yes. So they're very superficial. It's all about how you look, and it's all about your financial status. So, you know, there have been, you know, aunties who have literally seen me one time, maybe they've met me one time, and then next thing you know, they send a Rishta, and I'm like, you just saw me. You just think that I look pretty, or, you know, I offered you chai or something, so now you automatically assume that I'm good. But you don't
you're a good person based on, you know, how you looked. Yeah, right. They don't really spend time getting to know you. It's more about how you look, and that's why
they don't actually know me.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, like, imagine if this Rishta did happen, we get married, then you discover that I'm like the spawn of the devil, and I like ruin your life.
Yeah, it turns into one of those Saas Bahu dramas.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just, you're basically in Desi culture, you kind of just cross your fingers and hope for the best. But it's important for the other person to look good. A lot of times, you know, you'll notice when someone gets married, it's all about how the other person looks. They're like, oh, but that guy, he's not the best looking. His wife is prettier. Or they'll say, like, guy is really good looking. What happened? What was wrong with him? He chose this girl. She's not nearly as good looking as him. No one focus on compatibility, you know.
That's true.
Do they get along? Do they have the same interests? Are they... you know, do they have the same values?
Then that's the harder part for them to crack. That would kind of force them to kind of get to know you before they judge, but that's harder in Desi culture. I mean, why would anybody want to sit down and do that? Gossip is much easier when you focus on the easily observable, the superficial, outward, you know, external things.
Yeah.
Even my mom is part of this traditional culture, right? And even yesterday, she was reading off a meme from Facebook or something, and it was pretty interesting. It was written in Urdu, but I found it pretty funny because it kind of describes our traditional values too, where she was just talking about how log kya kehte hain, right? In that meme, you know, and I went through some of this stuff too. When you graduate, they're like, oh, where do you work? And then if you don't work somewhere good, they're like, oh, you need a good job. Then when you work, you have a good job, right? And then they'll be like, well, did you get your master's degree? No. You need a master's. Okay, if not a master's, then PhD. PhD would be really nice. PhD kar lo aap. So, are you married yet? Shadi nahi ki? Shadi nahi ki? So, even for the men, you'll get that. But if you are married, then it'll be bachche kab aa rahe hain. Then, my mom was reading, even went down to the number of kids. So, agar do bache hain, then yaar 6 hone chahiye, 5-6 to hone chahiye. And if you have 6 kids, 6 to zyada kar diye aapne, to 2-3 ही अच्छे रहते हैं. And then, you know, बच्चे हो गए, घर आपका बहुत छोटा है, घर बड़ा ले लेते, या घर लिया ही नहीं, शायद आप अपार्टमेंट्स में रह रहे हैं. अच्छा, आपको तो घर ले लेना चाहिए, ये बड़ा घर होना चाहिए. And then, you know, basically these types of expectations carry all the way down to the time you die, basically. But yeah, it was just like all about people's expectations. You know, you can die trying, but you'll never actually satisfy them.
Yeah, you're just basically never good enough. No matter what you do, you could, you know, solve world hunger, but there will always be something more that you could do. People are always willing to give you unsolicited advice.
Yeah.
That's one of the things, one of my pet peeves is when someone feels like they're super close to you and they can just give you advice on your life. And you're like, you know, I do have parents. They're right here. If I need help, if I need advice, they're not dead. They can, they can help me out. I don't need this random person to keep telling me, oh, you should do this or you should do that with your life.
Because, yeah, that's the other thing. We value age in terms of wisdom every time. I know it's a case many times that older people will be wiser, but not necessarily all the time. So when your parents aren't around, or sometimes even when your parents are around, they'll assume that, you know, you're younger than them. So that means you automatically are asking for their wisdom, for them to share their knowledge with you, to help you out in life, as if you were asking for help necessarily.
Yeah, it's frustrating and invading. You know, especially as somebody who's very private and reserved, I don't enjoy people being in my business
Hmm.
or, trying to fish for information when they keep asking you questions.
Hmm.
And I try to stay as vague as possible, but they'll keep asking and asking
Yeah, right.
until they get the answer that they want. I
Hmm.
mean, I literally had this auntie come over once. They were talking with my mom and everything, and as she was leaving, she was asking me, when am I getting married? I said, not anytime soon. She's like, this is the time for you to get married,
Hmm.
at least within the next year. And I was like, no, that's not for me. I'm not into that. I just want to wait a little bit. And she was like, no, I think next year is good for you. I was like, no.
Yeah. So just kind of
I was
like
like,
pushing
no.
herself onto you, right? Like, yeah, नहीं नहीं अगला साल ही ठीक है. Like she's the decision maker.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Yeah, the best part though was that she said to me, I think next year is the best because I want to come to your wedding and, I want to be able to dance. I don't want to be too old that I can't dance.
Hmm.
I was like, are you serious?
Hmm. Yeah, that's
You
true.
want me to get married within the next year so that you don't break a hip?
Right.
That's
Yeah.
the reason.
I mean, I got a little bit of pressure when I was not married yet. I was still single, but not a lot, not as much as girls do, right? But I would get things like शादी कर लो हमने हमारे कपड़े पुराने हो जा रहे हैं, we need to wear these clothes, and I'd be like, what? Seriously? I'm
Oh
getting
yeah. Like other people are more worried about themselves
Yeah.
than the actual person who's trying to get married or whatever.
Mhm.
They're gonna have a future wedding.
That's true. Yeah.
It's always like, I'm getting too old and I won't be able to dance or, my clothes will go out of style or I won't be able to fit in my stuff anymore.
Yeah. Well, marriages and weddings in our culture are a big deal. I've noticed that because I hadn't attended a wedding before my own. I hadn't attended one for years and years. I forgot what they even feel like, right? So the first wedding that I experienced after a long time was my own, and I started realizing how seriously people take it in terms of how good they look, and what they're wearing, and they're spending hours and hours more time than I spent getting ready myself. Not just the girls, but the guys themselves just be so stressed out, getting prepared, and trying to look their best and trying to get their dances right. Even the rehearsals, for example, my brothers were taking their dance preparations really seriously, and to the point of frustration. I was like, man, I'm not like I was stressed out about my wedding, but that's because it's my wedding. There were a lot of things that I had to take care of around, like just the logistics and just making sure that everything happens as planned. But then if I was attending somebody else's wedding, I really wouldn't care. I mean, yeah, you just want to wear something nice, but I think for a lot of people, it's more like how you look becomes permanent in photos, and you have to kind of look the best and get the best compliments. And again, it's just like this weird, superficial, like face keeping we have in our society. Like, we just gotta impress. We gotta not have a single bad thing said about us. It's unhealthy. It's an unhealthy pressure.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, it's all about looks. How does something look? How do you look? It's all very superficial and materialistic almost, basic culture. And people, it's not just the cultural aspect, it's also the people who adopt that culture. Instead of admitting that we have some faults and we should probably let these things go so we can be better and we can do better. But they're like, they accept it. They're like, you know what? It's good or bad. It's our culture, and this is just who we are.
Yeah, right. We've done an episode like this before where we just talked about what is the best age to get married. And you're 25. You're still not married yet. What age do you think is the best, in your opinion?
I think it's different for everyone. There have been some people that I've met who got married at an early age, but it was their own choice. It was not arranged, and
Right.
it wasn't something that was forced upon them. They wanted to get married, so they did. Some people got married later on in their life when they felt ready. I think a lot of it has to do with the person that makes you feel ready to get married. That's not you. Because if you look at it, marriage is supposed to be a lifelong journey, and you're spending it with this one person, and you don't want to take a risk where you're married to like a psychopath and you find out after you get married.
That's true. I mean, that's why also like now, because people are more open-minded, and obviously girls don't put up with half the things that guys do anymore as they used to in Desi culture. Now you see a higher rate of divorce among Pakistanis too, because yeah, I don't know, it's both ways. I think it's just like we have a reduced amount of patience for each other in general, and then secondly, people often fall under pressure by their parents, and I think the parents are definitely to blame for this. I've seen a few cases where the parents just kind of force their kids into getting married, and also the opposite, where the kids might be making some kind of unreasonable demand, and they'll see the warning signs, but the parents will be like, well, it's for their own sake, we'll go ahead and get them married, and then turns out it didn't work out. In other cases, the pressure for just getting them married and getting them out the house kind of exists, and that hastiness gets them in trouble because people don't put up with that anymore.
Yeah.
You'll see some cases where from the 50s and 60s where the girl was like 16 and she got married to like a 40-year-old guy. And then, they had a lot of problems. There was the age difference, the cultural difference, the mindset difference, but they just decided to, just cope with it. And you see them like 50 years later, if the guy's still alive, 50 years later, and they, like he's sleeping in his own room, the girl's sleeping in her own room, and they're not talking to each other, but they just decided to kind of put up with each other for the sake of society and the sake of their kids or what have you.
I have noticed that in our culture, divorce is so taboo. You don't want to get divorced. For older generations with our parents and everything like that, I have seen and heard of people who have separated, I guess you could say. Like the father lives with one child and the mother lives with the other child, but they're not legally divorced.
Yeah.
So it's like technically we're still married, but they don't talk to each other. They don't really meet each other. They live in separate homes, or they even live in separate rooms because they don't get along.
Yeah, even if they live in the same house, they often might not talk to each other.
Yeah.
Like you could be in one house and still be extremely lonely.
Yeah, they're like, we've done our duty.
Yeah.
We've raised our children. Now it's time for them to take care of us, regardless if we separate or not.
Mm-hmm. We have seen couples where they'll have kind of like a silent relationship. He gets up, he has his newspaper, his TV playing the news or whatever. She makes his breakfast, puts his chai on the table, and that's it. There's like no conversation. It's just their everyday routine, and they're just like robots now. She doesn't mess with him, and he doesn't mess with her, and they just decide to just cope until they croak.
They're living silent lives. I mean, I just find that to be sad, especially when you're in older age. That's when you need a companion the most.
Right.
When you're old and, your kids have grown up and moved out or gotten married, the person that you rely on is your spouse. And it's just really sucky if you don't get along with your spouse.
Right.
You hate each other's guts. You can't even look at each other. And when you hear their voice, you just want to rip your ears off. Mm-hmm. It's like a really big struggle.
Like, is that necessarily a bad... Well, I know that's bad, but is it necessarily bad to get into an arranged marriage, though, like they used to? Or do you think there's a right approach to having an arranged marriage?
I do think there is a right approach to an arranged marriage. Of course, both people have to be consenting naturally. And I also think that they should be allowed to meet and have a conversation. Whereas back in the day, it was just your parents arrange it and you meet on your wedding day. But I don't think that's right. I think it's important to meet and have at least a couple conversations where you can get to know each other and ask the important questions of your future. You should know these. You should agree on what you want your future life to be like. And I have seen arranged marriages work out for people, but I also have seen it not work out. And I think that's the case for any kind of a marriage. Mm-hmm. But for arranged marriages, I think it's more so because parents get involved and there's a lot of pressure when the parents are forcing you to meet. Then after one conversation, they're like, so did you, come up with a decision yet? Is this the right guy or not?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the good news is I think nowadays, at least, almost any sane couple does decide to get to see each other, like, first, they at least talk it out. And I think even in Pakistan now, well, in most cases, I would say, I don't think anybody will agree nowadays to just marry somebody they haven't even seen, just on the word of their parents. It used to be so common, I think, back in the day. I would hear about that. And, a lot of even in my family, like my mom's second cousins or something, and they just literally said yes because a guy lives in America or something like that. And I'd be like, wow, this is crazy. I haven't even met that person. But he might be pumping, he might be like, pumping people's gas in America or like doing pizza delivery. But he's in America. So they just took the glamour was high in the 70s and 80s, I guess, of just living in America. So they would just say yes at the word of America or abroad. And now you'll see people being much more skeptical. It doesn't matter where you live. I mean, yeah, you might make good money. The guy might have a good career and everything, but how is he as a person, right? The girl might be pretty, but like how is she as a person? So on both sides, I think I see more analysis before these tough decisions. So that's at least I think heading in a good direction.
I mean, I think a lot of the credit goes to obviously the younger generation where they are more outspoken now. In many cases, the parents think you're being buttermies because you're voicing your opinion and you're so adamant about it. But I think it's important for, your family and especially your parents to know your point of view. Because at the end of the day, it's your life. And I feel like if you are unhappy in your own life, then that's a failure. Of course, you don't want to be, completely selfish and disregard your family, but I think it's important to try to make them understand where you are coming from.
What advice do you have for young girls, especially like 18 to 20 years old, who might start getting the pressure and maybe they don't want to get married right away, right? Most of them are still in college at this time.
Yes. Well, I would just say, of course, parents are naturally going to pressure you for marriage because in our culture, desi parents think that should be your end goal. That's the ultimate happiness.
Yeah.
But I think nowadays, a lot of younger people realize that ultimate happiness comes through self-fulfillment. So whatever it is that fulfills you, whether it's school, work, hobbies, do all of those things. But you also have to have conversations with your parents. Let them know that this is your plan. This is what you want to do. You're looking at however many years.
Right.
So say you're 20 right now, say, okay, by the time I'm 26, I'll consider it. Until then, these are the things that I want to pursue. These are the things that I want to focus on. And in that time, I don't want to talk about getting married.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, it's very important to, be open with your parents and have them understand your game plan. I think if you have a plan, if you have some sort of direction, your parents would be less worried and less stressed and maybe more bored with following your lead.
Yeah, that's true. I think even for guys as well, if your parents just see you kind of lying in bed and browsing Instagram and you don't have a plan, an alternative plan for, I guess, what they're offering, then it might be kind of hard to fight back. So if, for example, your parents want you to go to school and you're deciding not to continue your studies, then maybe you should get a job or something,
Yeah.
But if you're just going to be browsing Instagram or just hanging out with your buddies late out at night, then you might get pressure and you might feel like a victim, but it'll be harder to kind of prove your case if you did not have some kind of other intelligent plan to fight back.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, your parents are always going to be your number one backbone. When everything else goes wrong, you really rely on your parents to help you out or give you advice. So naturally, they're always going to be worried about you. Sometimes children forget that. They forget or they ignore or they just don't realize how parents feel or if they're, put yourself in their shoes and try to see it from their perspective and they should see it from yours.
Yeah, that's true. You have to hit a compromise.